I still remember the weight of the gold bracelet slipping from my wrist into her palm. My new daughter-in-law's palm, on the day she married my son. A family gift, I'd said, smiling through the tears in my eyes. I never imagined that just 3 years later, the same girl would stand in my kitchen, looking me in the eye, and tell me, "You need to move out. This house is too big for you. And we've already spoken to your son about selling it." It was the moment I realized, betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices. Sometimes it comes wrapped in politeness, like poison in a teacup. My name is Eleanor, and I am 62 years old. I have lived in the same stone-walled house for over 40 years. A place that smelled of freshly baked bread on Sunday mornings and roses in summer. The place where my late husband, Daniel, and I raised our only son, Peter. Every brick of it holds a memory. After Daniel passed 10 years ago, I poured all my love and attention into Peter. He was my reason to get up in the morning, my anchor in the storm. I worked part-time at the local library, tended my garden, and quietly put away savings, not for myself, but for him. Always for him. When Peter met Anna, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. I gave them this house's guest room rent-free while they saved for their first apartment. I hosted every family dinner, sewed curtains for their place, and even gifted them part of my savings for their wedding. I told myself this was what mothers did. They gave, without keeping count. But love, I've learned, can be a dangerous currency. Once people believe it's endless, they start to take it for granted. It started small. Missed visits. Unreturned calls. Family dinners that I was too busy to be invited to. Then came the day Anna walked into my kitchen, her tone perfectly polite, and suggested I consider downsizing. I didn't answer right away. My hand stayed busy with the carrots I was peeling. My mind was racing, not with shock, but with a slow dawning understanding. I'd heard rumors from neighbors about a younger woman my husband had been spending time with before he left me years ago, and the way Peter had defended him then had stung. But I had forgiven. I had moved forward. And now, here I was, facing another betrayal, this time not from a husband, but from the very child I had protected all his life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through each room of my home, fingertips grazing the furniture. The wooden dresser Daniel built with his own hands. The lace tablecloth from my mother. The photographs lining the mantelpiece. Birthdays, anniversaries, Christmases past. I whispered to myself, no one will take this from me. Not without a fight. The next morning, I called Margaret, my oldest friend and the only person I could trust with what I was feeling. She came over with a thermos of tea, and we sat in my sunroom as I told her everything. Her eyes grew sharp, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Eleanor," she said firmly, "you've given and given until they think it's their right. If you don't protect yourself now, they'll take everything, and they'll smile while doing it." Her words lit a spark in me. I had spent so many years in the role of the gentle mother, the peacemaker, the giver. But maybe it was time to be something else. That afternoon, I made another call, this time to a solicitor in town, a man named Robert who had once helped Margaret with her late husband's estate. I told him my situation plainly, and for the first time in years, I felt the ground under my feet steady. Robert listened without interrupting, then said, "Mrs. Clarke, the first thing we need to do is secure your ownership. Every document, every account, every asset. We put it beyond their reach." Quietly. And that's how my quiet war began. I didn't tell Peter or Anna. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I gathered documents from my file cabinet, bank statements from my desk drawer, and carried them in a plain tote bag to Robert's office. Each time I left, I felt a little more like myself. Not the weary, overlooked mother, but the woman who had once built a life with her own 2 hands. Still, the ache in my chest didn't go away. At night, lying in bed, I replayed every moment I'd been pushed aside, every time Peter had chosen Anna's comfort over my feelings. And beneath the hurt, a seed of anger began to grow. One Saturday, Peter called. His tone was cheerful, but there was something in it, a practiced smoothness, that made my stomach tighten. "Mom," he said, "Anna and I have been talking about the house. We think it would be smart to sell now, while the market's high. You could get a smaller place, Maybe near that retirement complex. I cut him off. Peter, I'm not selling my home. My voice was calm, but inside I was trembling. Not from fear, but from the effort of holding back everything I wanted to say. He sighed, like I was a child who didn't understand reason. Mom, you don't need all that space. And Anna's been looking at listings. I hung up. Not angrily. Not loudly. Just ended the call. And as the dial tone hummed in my ear, I realized I didn't owe them explanations anymore. What I did owe myself was freedom. And I was about to claim it. I woke before the sun, the house still cool and blue. The radiators hadn't kicked in yet, and the quiet felt like the inside of a seashell, hollow, echoing with old sounds. I made tea and carried it to the dining table where I'd laid out my life the night before. Manila folders, rubber bands, the old tin of receipts Daniel and I used to jokingly call our treasure chest. It all looked so small. 40 years of building a home, folded into paper. Start with what you know, Robert had said. Then we'll move to what you suspect. What I knew was this. My name alone sat on the deed to the house. I had a pension from the library, some modest savings, my mother's jewelry tucked into a velvet pouch at the back of my wardrobe. What I suspected was a fog with teeth. I began with the bank statements. The paper was silky between my fingers, that thin, official kind that never lies. I ran my finger down the columns. Grocery store. Council tax. Gas bill. A florist I didn't remember. Twice. Then a payment to a furniture shop in town. Not my taste, all chrome and fur throws. Cleared last month for more than I would spend in a season. I closed my eyes. No. Eleanor. Don't look away now. I found the line that made my stomach drop. An automatic transfer from my savings to my current, flagged, household management, authorized. The same phrase appeared 3 times in the past 6 months. I didn't remember setting that up. And then, in my current account, a series of e-transfers out, each one labeled with Peter's initials. My chest prickled. I had added Peter to online banking years ago after Daniel died. In case something happens to me, I'd told him. It had felt practical, loving. The way mothers prepare, quietly, so no one has to panic later. Somewhere along the line, that open door had become a corridor for disappearing money. I kept reading. The numbers were tidy and cold. I circled them with a red pen until the page looked like it was bleeding. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, and I almost laughed. The house still did what it was supposed to. It kept the faith. I poured more tea and pulled out my phone. The last thread of me that still trembled reached for Margaret. She arrived 40 minutes later in her blue cardigan, face scrubbed, hair pulled back like a nurse on a night shift. She kissed my cheek, glanced at the table, and rolled up her sleeves. "Let's make a map," she said, and there she was again. The Margaret who'd paid off her mortgage early by keeping a plain notebook of every penny she spent. We laid down a sheet of butcher paper and drew boxes. Income. Outgoings. Transfers. She wrote in neat, schoolteacher print while I read aloud. "Florist?" she asked. "No birthdays," I said. "No funerals. Furniture shop?" I shook my head. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't say anything cruel at all. She just underlined the suspicious items and wrote, "Ask bank for authorizations and IP logs." IP logs, I said, and Margaret's mouth twitched. "My nephew's in IT, she said. We'll get there if we have to." By afternoon, we had a list for Robert that filled a page. We also had a second list, the one that felt like a thorny vine wrapping my ribs the tighter I looked at it. Access I've given away. Spare keys. Peter and Anna each had a set. Online banking. Peter had login. My healthcare portal. Peter had access, in case of emergencies. The safe in my wardrobe. Combination written on the back of an envelope in my desk. Power of attorney. Unassigned, because I'd never wanted to think about being that vulnerable. "I've been careless," I said aloud, the words tasting like pennies. "No," Margaret said, and her voice was the gentlest I'd ever heard it. "You've been trusting. There's a difference. And now you will be careful." We went room to room with a small spiral notebook. In the bedroom, I took down the velvet pouch and spread the jewelry on the quilt. My mother's pearl earrings, the gold bangle I'd given Anna the day she married Peter, the thin necklace Daniel had given me on our 10th anniversary. My stomach tightened when I saw the space where the second bangle should have been. I tried to believe I had misplaced it. "Photograph everything," Margaret said. She held my phone. I held the measuring tape beside each piece. We wrote down descriptions like museum curators preserving the past from hands less reverent than ours. When we were done, we sealed the jewelry in a zippered case and slid it into my old leather handbag. I didn't put it back in the wardrobe. The next day, I went to the bank. I wore my nicest coat and a lipstick that made me feel like someone who takes no nonsense. The young woman at the desk had kind eyes and a nose ring that glinted in the strip lighting. "How can I help you, Mrs. Clarke?" "I need to revoke third-party online access," I said, surprised that my voice didn't shake. "And I'd like a printout of every new payee added and every transfer to that payee in the last 12 months. I also want to change every password and enable whatever extra lock you've invented." She nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. "We can do two-factor authentication with a physical token if you'd like." "Yes," I said. "A token." I imagined an old knight handing me a shield. She printed the payee list and highlighted 3 names I'd never seen. "These were added from a mobile device," she said. "We can submit a request for device details, but it may require a formal report." I stared at the paper. The amount wasn't ruinous. Not yet. But it wasn't the money that made my palms sweat. It was the presumption. The tiny ongoing decision to take, to assume I wouldn't notice, or worse, that I would notice and do nothing. "Please flag my account," I said. "No new payees without me here in person." When I left the bank, the sky had shaken itself into sunlight. The high street smelled like chips and rain. I stood still long enough to feel both, then went to Robert's office. He greeted me with that careful warmth professionals have for clients on the edge. I handed him the folder like a student handing in an essay, and he read in silence, a pen tapping against the margin. "This is good," he said at last, and I felt the smallest uncurling inside me. "We'll formalize protections, a living trust for the house with you as trustee, healthcare directives naming who you choose, and a new will that cannot be bullied open. We'll also send a letter to your son, a generic notice that your accounts are being secured. Not accusatory. Just informative." I felt heat rise up my neck. "I'm not ready to show my hand." He nodded. "Then we won't. But we will document. Get yourself a notebook, Eleanor. Every call. Every message. Dates, times, what was said. If they push harder, the record will hold steady even if your breath does not." I bought a small black notebook at the corner shop on my way home. On the first page I wrote the date. Then, "Changed all locks?" I stared at the question mark, then called a locksmith. The man came that evening, smelled like sawdust, and worked briskly while I made him tea. When he handed me the new keys, they felt heavier, as if some portion of their weight had come from my own spine. That night, the house sighed in a way I recognized. It was the exhale after a long car ride, the moment the seatbelt comes off and the body remembers how to be a body. I slept. 2 days later, I met the investigator. Her name was Lila, not the trenchcoat sort, but a tidy woman in her 40s with a bob and shoes you could run in. Robert had set it up. We met in a cafe that used to be the Drapers before the town decided it wanted latte art. I liked Lila immediately, because she didn't treat me like a victim or a fool. "Here's what I can do," she said, sliding a small notepad between us. "If we suspect unauthorized access to accounts or assets, I can trace digital footprints, confirm the origin of transfers, and map connections between payees. I'm not the police. I can't subpoena. But I can collect public records, follow trails, and put together a picture of behavior. You decide what you want to see." I took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I want to see the truth," I said. "However ugly it is." She nodded. "Then we start with the obvious. Who benefits if you sell the house? Who has motive to keep you grateful? Who introduces helplessness as a story about you?" Her questions were like someone pulling knots from my hair, gentle and relentless. I told her about the remarks, downsizing, too much space, retirement complex. I told her about the furniture store transaction, the missing bangle, the transfers with Peter's initials. I told her about the way Anna had said, "We've already spoken to your son," as if my son were a committee and I were a proposal. "Give me a week," Lila said. "I'll be quiet. If you get messages that feel like temperature checks, note them down." They came almost immediately. "Hey Mom, how are you feeling? Anna says we should all get together soon. Maybe at ours?" Peter's text landed like a pebble in a glass. I imagined Anna's fingertips on his phone, coaching his words. I wrote the message in my notebook with the time and then replied, "Busy this week. I'll let you know." An hour later, another ping. "Did the bank call you about weird activity? Got a notification on my end. Might be a glitch." My hands went cold. He hadn't had an end for 2 days. "All fine," I wrote, heart hammering. "I'm handling my accounts myself." Margaret squeezed my shoulder when I showed her the exchange. "There it is," she murmured. "The first draft of a story that paints you as fragile. Don't pick up that pen." We spent the afternoon boxing up non-essentials. Seasonal linens, photo albums, books I loved but didn't need at arm's reach. I wasn't leaving. I was simply removing temptations from anyone who might drop by to check on me. I took the boxes to a small storage unit near the garden center, a place that smelled of soil and motor oil. The manager handed me a key and a laminated card. "Keep this safe," he said, and I almost smiled. That evening, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and took stock. The wardrobe felt less crowded, like a closet after confession. On my dresser sat a new small safe, bolted to the wall, a dull cube with a keypad that beeped politely. Inside were the documents Robert had asked me to secure and my mother's pearls wrapped in tissue. I pressed the door closed and felt, briefly, like a child whose toy box had been tidied by someone kind. The week passed with the practical rhythm of a well-run kitchen. Passwords changed, directives drafted, keys redistributed, this time only to me and to Margaret, sealed in an envelope with her name on it. Robert sent me drafts of the trust and the will. Seeing my wishes written down in legal language was like seeing my own life in a mirror that corrected bad lighting. Clearer, steadier, mine. On Friday morning, Lila called. "I have a picture," she said. "Not a masterpiece yet, but a sketch." I met her at the cafe again. She opened a thin folder, and there it was, screenshots of public social posts, Anna's friend showing off a new velvet sofa tagged with a furniture shop's location, a bouquet of lilies in a vase on Anna's kitchen island, same florist as my statement, a blurry photo of a weekend cottage getaway for a girls' retreat, the rental confirmed in a booking database Lila had access to through legitimate means. "Paid with a card in your name," she said quietly, tapping the cottage invoice. "Virtual card on a linked wallet. Easy to miss." My throat closed. The cottage had been 3 weeks after the day Anna told me to consider leaving my home. "There's more," Lila said, flipping the page. "2 of the payees receiving transfers from your account are shell accounts. Names used to route funds before they land in a primary account. The primary account appears to belong to your son, based on associated subscriptions and delivery addresses." The cafe clattered around us, spoons and mugs, a hiss of steam, laughter at a nearby table. I felt the world tilt and then right itself. "I want copies," I said. My voice sounded very far away and very calm. "And I want to know the cleanest way to show this to my solicitor." "You're doing everything right," she said. "One more thing. There's a message thread, public unfortunately, where your daughter-in-law makes a joke about being the house CFO now that you're slowing down. It's light, but it establishes tone." We sat in silence for a moment. The word slowing throbbed like a bruise. I wrote it in my notebook with a small arrow and the word story. When I got home, the sky had shifted to that yellow-gray that means rain is asking permission. I set the folder on the dining table and put my palm on it. Paper can cut, yes, but it can also bind. I called Robert and read him the headlines. Shell accounts, linked wallets, furniture, flowers, cottage. He asked me to bring everything in the next morning. "And Eleanor?" he said before hanging up. Do not confront them tonight. I won't, I said and meant it. But after we ended the call, I wandered the house like a woman testing floorboards. I ended up in the kitchen, hands on the cool edge of the sink. Outside, the roses needed deadheading. Inside, a cake tin sat on the counter with 2 slices left from the batch I'd brought to the library ladies. I cut a neat piece and ate it standing up, tasting lemon and restraint. The doorbell rang. My heart performed a small, irritated leap. Through the frosted glass, I could make out Peter's tall outline and, beside him, the confident tilt of Anna's head. She wore the kind of coat that looks expensive without trying, and she had a bouquet in her hand. Lilies, white as a blank page. I opened the door but left the chain on. Mom! Peter's smile was wide. Too wide. We were just in the area and thought. We brought flowers, Anna said, thrusting them forward. The scent was thick and sweet and made me think of waiting rooms. I looked at the lilies, then at them. It's late, I said gently. Next time, call first. Peter's smile faltered, then snapped back. Can we come in for a minute? Not tonight, I said. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, a quick drumming that did not belong to fear. I have an early morning. Anna tilted her head. Are you feeling okay, Eleanor? We were worried when the bank messaged me. The bank messaged you. I asked, the words crisp, careful. She blinked. Well, you know, because of the linked, I said, and let the syllable hang like a small bell. Peter cleared his throat. We should schedule a day to go over the house, Mom. Maybe get valuations. It's just smart. I met my son's eyes. I saw the little boy who had once cried because a ladybird crawled up his sleeve and he couldn't bear the tickle. I saw the man who now spoke of my home like it was a chess piece he could move to the edge of the board. We're not doing valuations, I said. And we're not discussing the house. Good night. Anna's smile did a quick, graceless thing. We're only trying to help. I know, I said, and this time my voice was very kind and very final. Good night. I closed the door. I stood there, my forehead against the wood, and breathed until the thudding in my wrists quieted. The lilies' smell lingered like a stranger's perfume after they've left your chair. I carried them to the bin and placed them on top of the potato peelings. Then I washed my hands until the scent thinned to nothing. When I turned around, the folder was still on the table where I'd left it. The house was still mine. The tea kettle still waited for me, faithful as a dog. I put the chain back on the door and made another cup of tea. That night, I dreamed about paper boats floating down a narrow stream behind our childhood flat. Daniel and me bending over the water to set them free. You have to crease the corners hard, he'd said, or they get soggy and sink. I woke with the taste of river air in my mouth and the phrase in my head. Crease the corners. At Robert's office the next morning, we spread Lila's findings out like a map. He read carefully, lips pressed thin. This is a pattern, he said, tapping the shell accounts. Not a mistake. We'll prepare a formal demand. Cease and desist, account for all funds, return what's taken. We'll also set the trust today. After that, if pressure continues, we'll seek an injunction against any interference with your property. A strange, fierce lightness filled me. And if they deny it? I asked. We have more than enough to prove access and benefit, he said calmly. But remember, confrontation is not performance. It is procedure. We don't shout. We present. Procedure. Present. I wrote the words in my notebook and underlined them twice. When I got home, a voicemail waited on the landline. Peter's voice irritated now. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. Why are you being so dramatic? Call me back. I pressed delete without writing it down. Then I picked up the black notebook and added a line anyway. Voicemail, 11:42 a.m. Tone escalating. Because feelings come and go, but the record stands. I moved through the rest of the day with a steadiness that surprised me. I made soup. I called the library to confirm my volunteer shift. I watered the roses and snipped away the brown heads. When the sun dropped, the house settled into itself like a cat curling on a windowsill. At dusk, an email arrived from Lila. One more screenshot, This one of a message Anna had sent to a friend months ago. "We'll ease her out gently. She's nice, but she's not practical. The house needs a real family." I read it twice. The first time, I felt the old ache. The second time, I felt the ache burn down to coal. A real family, I thought, smoothing my hand over the grain of the dining table Daniel had sanded himself. I am a real family. Even if it's only me. I placed the email printout with the others. The corners were creased hard. Tomorrow, we would serve papers. Tonight, I locked the doors, turned out the lights and whispered into the dark, not to my son or to Anna or even to Daniel, but to the woman I had been avoiding for years, the one who knew where the spare keys were, who could bake a lemon cake by memory, who could read a bank statement like a weather report and plan for storms. "I'm here," I told her. "I won't leave you." The house exhaled. Somewhere outside, a fox barked. I slept without dreaming. The morning the papers were served, the sky was a hard, pale blue. Not a cloud in sight, just that cold, stretched thin kind of light that makes everything look sharper. I'd slept well, strangely enough. My tea tasted stronger. The floorboards under my slippers felt sturdier. Robert had arranged for the papers to be delivered by a process server. A man who looked more like a neighbor coming by to return a rake than someone delivering legal notice. He knocked on my door at 9 sharp to hand me a copy for my records. The envelope was heavier than it looked. "This will get their attention," he said quietly. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. The cease and desist, the demand to account for all unauthorized transactions, the official notice that my house was now held in a trust with me as sole trustee, and a clear statement that any further interference would be met with legal action. I watched him walk to his car, papers for Peter and Anna in his hand. It only took an hour. My phone lit up first with Peter's name. I didn't answer. Then Anna's. I let it ring out. 5 minutes later, the pounding at my front door started. I'd already decided. I wouldn't let them in. Not today. Through the chain, I saw them both. Peter flushed and stiff-jawed. Anna's lips pressed into a line that would have looked sympathetic to anyone who didn't know her. "What is this?" Peter held up the envelope as though it were an insult in itself. "You sent us legal papers? What is going on, Mom?" I kept my voice even. "It's exactly what it says, Peter. A formal protection of my property and accounts. Nothing more, nothing less." Anna stepped forward. "You didn't need to go to a lawyer. We could have talked." "We did talk," I said, still calm. "You suggested I sell my home. You accessed my accounts without my permission. This is my answer." Peter's voice rose. "We were helping. You've been so distant lately. We thought you might need guidance." I felt the old Eleanor, the one who would have explained, soothed, offered tea, stir inside me. I let her sit still. "Guidance," I repeated, "is not the same as control. I'm capable of making my own decisions." Anna's smile was tight now. "We're family. This feels cold." "It feels," I said, "like boundaries. I think you'll find they're warmer than they look, once you stop pushing against them." For a long moment, no one spoke. A breeze rustled the rosebush by the door. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Finally, Peter's shoulders dropped, but his eyes stayed hard. "You're making a mistake, Mom." I didn't flinch. "I've made plenty. This isn't one of them." They left without another word, the sound of their car pulling away like a door slamming in the distance. I shut my own door, slid the chain back into place, and leaned against it. My hands were steady. My breath was steady. Margaret arrived half an hour later, carrying a basket of scones. "Well?" she asked. "They came. They tried." I shrugged. I didn't bend. She smiled, that slow, approving smile she reserved for moments when the library's most chaotic children finally sat still to read. "Good." We sat at the kitchen table, scones between us, and went over the next steps. Robert had advised we prepare for their pushback. Possible attempts to paint me as confused or unwell, maybe even whispers to neighbors. "I'll be ready," I told Margaret. And I meant it. That afternoon, I walked into town for groceries. The air smelled of fresh bread from the bakery, the cobblestones still damp from the morning dew. At the butcher's, Mrs. Langley asked after Peter. I smiled and said, "We're giving each other some space right now." It was true, and it was enough. Back home, I put the shopping away and took out the black notebook. Under today's date, I wrote, "Papers served. Attempted doorstep confrontation. Boundary held." Later, Robert called to say the process server reported, "Delivery accepted under protest." I almost laughed, as if life were a formal meeting. "Eleanor," Robert said, "you've taken the first step. The hardest part now is staying the course." As I hung up, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was directing. And that felt like a kind of power I'd forgotten I could have. 3 days passed before the second wave hit. It came quietly at first, a phone call from my cousin Margaret in Devon. "I had coffee with an old neighbor of yours," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "She mentioned she'd heard you weren't managing so well. That maybe Peter and Anna were stepping in to take care of things for you." I felt the heat creep up my neck. And where do you think she heard that from? Margaret didn't have to answer. We both knew. That afternoon, I found a folded leaflet from a local retirement complex slipped under my front door. No note, just the glossy photo of a smiling gray-haired couple holding hands in a manicured garden. I set it on the counter, looked at it for a long moment, then dropped it in the recycling bin. By evening, the push had grown bolder. A message from Peter. "Mom, this has gotten out of hand. Let's just meet and sort it. Anna's really worried you're making decisions that will hurt you in the long run." I stared at the screen, my fingers still. I knew what that meeting would be. A polished, reasonable-sounding ambush. Smiles that hide a script. And I had no interest in being their audience. I wrote back, "All my decisions are mine to make. There's nothing to sort." An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, it was Lila. "I've been tracking some of the digital chatter," she said. "They've been inquiring about the value of your house with a local agent. Off the record, of course, but the inquiries leave a footprint." Something in me settled, the way dust does when you stop pacing a room. "Document it," I told her. "Everything." The next morning, I decided to take back something else. My presence. For too long I'd been the quiet shadow at family gatherings, waiting for an invitation that came late, if at all. So I walked into the Thursday craft group at the library, head high, and joined in the knitting circle like I'd never missed a week. Margaret beamed when she saw me. "About time," she said. "We've got a quilt to finish, and you've got the steadiest hands here." It felt good, the rhythm of needles, the easy chatter. The library smelled of old paper and polished wood. Familiar, solid scents. No one asked me about Peter or Anna. No one treated me like I was fragile. I was just Eleanor again. That evening, I treated myself to something I hadn't done in years. Dinner out, alone. A small Italian place on the edge of town, the kind Daniel used to take me to for anniversaries. I ordered a glass of wine and fresh pasta, and when the waiter asked if I was waiting for anyone, I smiled and said, "No. Just me." Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed. "Anna this time. We've spoken to a solicitor too. We can challenge some of what you've done if it's not in your best interest." I put the phone face down and twirled another forkful of pasta. The sauce was rich, garlicky, perfect. I refused to let their noise drown it out. When I got home, I opened the black notebook and wrote, "Attempted intimidation, legal threat by text." No reply given. That weekend, Robert called. "They've contacted me through their solicitor," he said. "It's all very carefully worded. Concern for your well-being, questioning whether you're being influenced by others." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Others meaning you?" "Or your friend Margaret," he said. "Classic tactic. Make it look like you're not acting on your own." "Then we make it clear that I am," I said. "Every step." After the call, I stood in the middle of my kitchen and looked around. This was my command center now. The kettle, the table, the folders lined neatly in their drawer. I'd once thought of it as the heart of a home I was trying to keep together for other people. Now it was the heart of a home I was protecting for myself. That night, I called Margaret. I'm done playing defense, I told her. They want a meeting? I'll give them one. My terms, my place, my rules. And Robert will be there. She chuckled. Now you're talking. I set the table like I was expecting royalty. Not for their sake, for mine. The oak gleamed under the lamplight, the same table Daniel had sanded himself decades ago. 3 chairs, not 4, so no one could bring a surprise guest. A pot of tea, milk in the jug, shortbread on a plate. Robert sat at one end, a neat folder in front of him. I sat opposite the empty chairs. My pulse was steady, my hands folded in my lap. This was my home, my table. When the doorbell rang, Robert and I exchanged a brief nod. I opened the door to find Peter and Anna, dressed as if they were coming from a business lunch. Peter in a pressed shirt, Anna in a blazer that whispered money. "Mom," Peter said, smiling with only his mouth. "Thanks for agreeing to talk." I set the time. I set the place, I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." They walked in, looking around as if cataloging the furniture. I caught Anna's gaze flick to the mantel where family photos used to stand. I'd moved them to a drawer weeks ago. She sat down with a tight little smile, crossing her legs. Robert cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'll remind everyone this meeting is being documented, and my client, Mrs. Clarke, has requested I represent her interests in any discussion involving her property, finances, or well-being." Anna's eyebrows lifted. "Well, that sounds formal." "It is," I said evenly. "Formality is clarity. And I want clarity." Peter leaned forward. "Mom, we're just worried." Robert held up a hand. "We'll address that. But first, let's review what's been discovered." He opened the folder and began laying out documents. Bank statements with highlighted transactions, screenshots of social media posts, Anna's friend boasting about the new sofa from the same store charged to my account, the weekend cottage rental, the florist payments. Then the report from Lila, detailing the shell accounts and the transfers traced back to Peter. As Robert spoke, the only sound was the tick of the kitchen clock. Peter's jaw tightened. Anna's hand stilled on her knee. "I can explain those," Peter said finally. "I'm listening," I said. "It was just temporary. We meant to pay you back. It's not like you need the money right now." "That," I said sharply, "is not your decision to make. Not now, not ever." Anna spoke next, her voice sweet but sharp underneath. "Eleanor, we didn't mean for it to come across this way. You've been so removed lately, and we thought maybe you needed some help managing things." I leaned forward, my voice calm but cutting. "Help is when you ask what I need. Control is when you take without asking. And theft," I tapped the highlighted transactions, "is when you move money that isn't yours." The silence after that was thick. Peter tried again, softer this time. "We're family. We should be able to work this out without lawyers and paperwork." I felt the old pull, the mother's instinct to smooth things over, to make it easier for him. But I stayed where I was. "Family," I said, "is not a free pass. It's a responsibility. And I have a responsibility to myself now. That's why I've secured my home in a trust, changed my accounts, and documented every word since this began. You will have no further access to my finances, my property, or my personal accounts. Ever." Anna's mask cracked just enough for her to glance at Peter, a quick flash of annoyance. Robert closed the folder. "If there are any disputes over these terms, you can direct them to my office. Otherwise, we consider this matter closed." Peter sat back, his eyes cooler now. "So that's it? You're cutting us off." "I'm drawing a boundary," I said. "What you do on your side of it is up to you. But on my side, I will live without fear of my own family taking from me." Anna stood first, adjusting her blazer. "I suppose we'll leave then." "Yes," I said, standing too. "You will." I walked them to the door. No hugs, no soft words. Just the quiet click of the latch when they stepped outside. When the door was shut, I turned to Robert. He gave me a rare smile. You did well, Eleanor. Very well. I poured us both tea. My hands didn't shake. That night, I wrote in the black notebook. Confrontation at my table. Evidence presented. Boundaries set. They left. I stayed. The morning after the meeting, the house felt lighter. Not in any dramatic way, just a subtle shift. Like when you finally put down a heavy shopping bag you didn't realize was cutting into your fingers. I made tea, opened the curtains, and let the light in without wondering if someone might be outside waiting to drop by. For the first time in months, my thoughts wandered to things that had nothing to do with lawyers or account statements. I thought about planting dahlias in the back garden. I thought about repainting the guest room in the pale yellow Daniel once called sunlight in a can. And then, of course, my phone buzzed. A text from Peter. Mom, we need to talk. Please. Can I come by tonight? I stared at it for a long moment. My first instinct, the old instinct, was to say yes. To smooth things over, even if it meant stepping into the same patterns again. But I had promised myself, no more meetings without my terms, my boundaries. I wrote back, if you need to speak with me, arrange it through Robert. Otherwise, I'm not available. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Anna this time. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through clipped and bright, the kind of brightness that comes with strain. Eleanor, you're taking this too far. You can't just cut us out. We're family, and families help each other. Call us back before things get worse. Before things get worse. I wrote the phrase in my notebook, underlined it twice. A veiled warning, if ever there was one. By midday, the threat had shifted. Margaret came over, eyebrows high. You'll never guess who just tried to have a cozy chat with me in the bread aisle, she said. I didn't need to guess. They wanted to know if you've been fully yourself lately, she continued. Anna said she's concerned you're being influenced by people with their own agenda. I laughed. A real, unshaken laugh. Influenced by my own best interests, maybe. Margaret shook her head. They're fishing. Testing if they can stir doubt in people who matter to you. Don't give them anything to work with. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. The next day, I went to the bank again, not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted to check. All secure. No new payees. No unusual activity. The teller smiled and said, We've got a flag on your account now, Mrs. Clarke. Nothing moves without your say-so. It felt like locking the last window in a house you just finished securing. In the weeks that followed, I began to live again. Really live. I joined the walking group Margaret had been nagging me about for years. I hosted a small dinner for 2 friends from the library, filling the kitchen with the smell of roasting chicken and fresh bread. I even took myself to the seaside for a weekend. Just me, the sea air, and a notebook that held no evidence, only poems and memories. Peter and Anna's contact became less frequent. A short text on my birthday. A message about a distant cousin's wedding. Both polite. Both ignored. But one evening, there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell. A knock. Through the frosted glass. I saw Peter. Alone. I considered not answering. But something in his stance, shoulders low, hands deep in his coat pockets, made me open the door, chain still on. Mom, he said, voice quieter than I'd heard in months. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. For how things went. For letting Anna push me. For not protecting you like I should have. The words were right, but there was a hollowness in them. Still I nodded. Thank you for saying that. Can I come in? I thought of the garden. The guest room. The bank account. The notebook. No, I said gently. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Trust isn't something you get back with one apology, Peter. It's something you earn slowly. He nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. I understand. When he walked away, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, just clarity. I closed the door, turned the chain, and whispered to the house, We're safe. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Final attempt, apology offered. Boundary held. Peace maintained. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without dreaming of loss, only of what I had kept. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't kick down the door or throw a party in your honor. It comes quietly, slipping into your days like the scent of fresh bread from the oven. Warm, steady, familiar. Weeks had passed since Peter's visit. I hadn't heard from him or Anna since. At first, the silence felt like a bruise, tender, noticeable in every quiet moment. But gradually, it became something else entirely. Freedom. I filled my mornings with things I'd once put off. The garden bloomed with dahlias, their bold heads nodding in the breeze. I repainted the guest room, the sunlight-colored walls glowing in the afternoons. I read in the evenings, a pot of tea beside me, no phone in reach. The black notebook now sat in a drawer, not hidden, just no longer needed daily. Its pages held a record of every line I'd drawn and defended, proof that I had not only survived betrayal, but refused to let it write the ending for me. Sometimes, I caught myself thinking about Daniel. About the way he used to say, "You crease the corners, Ellie, so the boat keeps its shape." I realize now that life is much the same. You have to fold it deliberately, protect its edges, or it will come apart in the water. One Saturday morning, Margaret and I walked along the pier, the sea air sharp in our lungs. She looked at me with that quiet knowing in her eyes. "You're different," she said. "I'm myself," I replied. And I meant it. Not the version of me who gave until she was hollow. Not the one who bent to keep everyone else comfortable. Just me. People often talk about forgiveness as if it's something you owe. I've learned it's something you can choose, or not. And either way, you can still move forward. I don't hate Peter or Anna. But I no longer trust them. And that's all right. Because trust isn't about blood or history. It's about respect. And respect begins with yourself. In the end, they didn't get my house. They didn't take my savings. They didn't take my peace. And perhaps most importantly, they didn't take me. If you're listening to this, and you've been told you're overreacting for protecting what's yours, let me say this. Boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They're gates to keep harm from coming in. And once you know how to close the gate, you'll never again mistake intrusion for care. I walked home from the pier that day with the sea wind in my hair, the sun warm on my back, and the absolute certainty that my life, in all its quiet beauty, was entirely my own. A month after the confrontation, I was in my garden trimming the roses when the postman came through the gate. He handed me a single envelope with Peter's handwriting on it. I stood there for a moment, pruning shears in one hand, the envelope in the other. The paper was heavier than it needed to be. Inside was a single page. "Mom, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you've shut me out completely. I hope one day you'll let me back in." I read it twice. There were no apologies for the money, the lies, the manipulation. Only the focus on his own discomfort. The old me might have answered it, might have tried to explain my reasons, to keep a fragile bridge from collapsing. The woman I am now? She set the letter down on the kitchen table, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window where the dahlias nodded in the breeze. I didn't tear the letter up. I didn't respond either. I simply let it be. Because I've learned something that took me 62 years to understand. Not every message deserves an answer. I no longer feel the need to prove I'm reasonable, to convince someone of my worth, or to beg for the kind of care that should be freely given. The people who value you will make space for you without being asked. The people who don't will fill the space you give them until you have none left for yourself. When I think back on the months of gathering evidence, securing my accounts, changing my locks, I realize it wasn't just about protecting my home. It was about protecting my voice. My no. Because once you know you can say it, and mean it, the fear of losing people fades, and the fear of losing yourself disappears entirely. I went back to the garden after my tea, slipping my gloves on and bending to snip away the dead blooms. Every cut made room for something new to grow. As I worked, I thought about how my story might sound to someone who has never been betrayed by their own family. They might think I was harsh, or cold. Let them. Those who've lived it will understand. And if you have lived it, if someone has tried to take from you because they thought you'd be too gentle, too loyal, too afraid to stop them, hear me when I say this. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to choose peace over pleasing others. You are allowed to keep your keys, your money, your home, your life. And when the day comes that someone realizes they can no longer walk through you to get what they want, when they finally meet the gate you've closed, you'll see it in their eyes. They'll understand you've changed. And you won't ever need to explain how.